guide showing ice.
Are detained for their activism, but
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Food Empowerment Project's youth webinar titled Empowering Our Communities, Navigating Federal Changes, Upholding Your Rights, Encouraging Food Justice, and Protecting Your Mental Health. My name is Kennedy Little. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Food Empowerment Project's youth advocacy team member. I'm now going to do a description of myself. I'm a Black woman with bit curly hair. I have these colorful earrings on, and I'm wearing this checkered, colorful shirt. Before we get started, I would like to thank our talented communications team member, Tyra Willis, and founder and general program team member, Lauren Ornelas, for the powerful video that just played. It displays the many challenges our nation and world are facing today, but also the resilience we showcase despite our hardships. My heart particularly goes out to all of the activists and protesters in LA. These are very scary and troubling times, but we must lean on each other to make impact and to make a change that we want to see in the world. I'm now going to share a bit about Food Empowerment Project, also known as FEP. We are a vegan food justice nonprofit organization that works to raise awareness about how our food choices can and will change the world. By making informed, ethical food choices, we can make a difference and take a stand against abuses against both human and non-human animals. We are a team of 6 and follow a collective model, meaning that all team members' voices matter in our day-to-day decisions, something that we believe deeply. The main focus of our work and campaigns can be broken into 4 areas: veganism, access to healthy food, chocolate, and farm worker rights. Like many of you, FEP recognizes that our world is in crisis, and we must have compassionate and informed youth leaders and supporters who are ready to take a stand against injustices far and wide. We're so moved to have an intergenerational audience here today to think deeply about strengthening and protecting their communities amidst restrictive administrative changes. Our goal for you today is to gain insights from 4 incredible speakers who are experts in federal law, policy, organizing, food justice, and mental health. As we begin this event, we would like to take a moment to make a land and labor acknowledgement. I'm currently residing on Shawnee, Cherokee, Chickasaw, and Osage land. Our speaker, Amber, resides on Notachink and Piscataway land. Our other speaker, Lauren Ornelas, resides on Northern Chumash land. Bina Ahmed resides on Tongova land. And our final speaker, Naomi Moshier, resides on Picketaway and Suquay Hanak land. We recognize that this land was stolen from the original peoples of these areas, and want to take a moment to honor, remember, and pay respect to the elders, both past and present, who have stewarded these lands for generations. And we ask you to reflect and do the same as well. FEP recognizes that the United States as we know it was built at the often fatal expense of enslaved Black people. We acknowledge that much of what we know of this country today, including its culture, economic growth, and development, has been made possible by the labor of enslaved Africans who were kidnapped and their descendants. And we recognize their contributions and the continued contributions of their survivors. We also want to acknowledge farm workers, past and present, whose labor is exploited and sometimes not paid, some of whom are children. The vast majority are from Mexico, and others are from Central and South America, many of whom are undocumented, suffer even more abuses. Because of them, we have food. Because of them, we eat. Because of them, many of us do not go hungry. As a reminder, the first 50 youth attendees who registered will be receiving a Know Your Rights activist pack. This pack includes a copy of the US Constitution to encourage an understanding of your rights, a Liberate All Beans sticker from Vegan Power Co., a poster from Just Seeds People's Movements in the US series, and an FEP Eat Your Ethics sticker. We are so grateful to all of those that donated to this event. After the event, you will receive a post-event email. In the email, you will find a survey. We also ask that all youth do the survey by Thursday, June 19th. So happy early Juneteenth. This is how we will get your contact information for the Know Your Rights Activist Pack, but also how you can give feedback to share other ideas that you have for events you would like to see. Before we get started, I have a few technology announcements. Throughout the seminar, please stay updated with the Zoom chat located at the bottom of your screen. This will allow you to get the full context of the webinar and other important information we have to share. If you want to communicate with other attendees in the chat, please make sure your messages are set to be visible to everyone instead of just host and panelists. And if you would like to submit questions to our experts, please click the Q&A box next to the chat box to submit those questions. All right, you all, thank you so much for listening to that introduction. Let's go ahead and begin with our first incredible speaker, Umbar Qureshi. Umbar will be speaking on navigating federal changes in immigration. But before we bring Umbar on screen, we're going to do a quick poll to test your knowledge on federal changes in immigration. So let's go ahead and bring up that poll. All right, you all, we're taking you back to your college or high school or even middle school history class. Which branch of government passes immigration laws? So let's take a second to think about that question. Choice A, legislative branch. Choice B, executive branch. Choice C, administrative agencies. Or choice C, judicial branch. So let's give everyone 10 to 15 seconds to try to figure out that answer on which branch of government passes immigration laws. Right? All right, it's been about 10 or 15 seconds. Let's go ahead and bring up the results on screen. Okay, so we have 6 out of 8 people that said legislative branch, 75%. So the correct answer is legislative branch. They are responsible for passing all laws. And then the judicial branch, they make sure that those laws are constitutional. The administrative branch, they handle a whole nother side of things. But I'm super excited to bring Umber to talk about the breakdown of that. But great job, you all. Before we get started, I would love to give Umber an introduction. She is quite a powerhouse. Umbar Qureshi, she, her, is the founder of the law office Umbar Qureshi, a firm that represents individuals and organizations seeking to litigate requests for information from federal government agencies under the Freedom of Information Act. Umber previously served as a staff attorney at the National Immigration Project, where she worked on litigation challenging anti-immigrant policies and supported grassroots partners on local advocacy campaigns. She regularly provides trainings and resources to community members and organizations on immigration and enforcement issues. She is a graduate of Yale Law School, Johns Hopkins University School of Education, and University of Maryland College Park. Umber will be speaking on navigating federal changes in immigration. As you listen to Umber, please remember that long before the 2024 election and the positioning of the Trump administration and the federal government, immigrants have endured bigotry, racism, discrimination, and separation by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE. As a result, many immigrants are fearful of leaving their homes. Thank you, Umber, for speaking on this powerful topic.
Thank you so much, Kennedy, and thank you to the Food Empowerment Project for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, great. So I am going to be talking about navigating federal changes in immigration, and I'll also provide a brief overview of your rights. But although one of the later speakers, Bina, is going to talk more in depth about that. But as you all have probably heard, there have been a lot of changes in immigration over the last few months. And although there's not enough time to go through every single change, we'd be here forever. I wanted to provide some background knowledge to you all so that you can walk away from these 20 minutes with hopefully a better ability to understand the latest policy changes. and that when you read, the next news story about immigration or hear about a policy change, you can be better equipped to understand sort of why and how this is happening. Um, so I'll talk about the history of immigration law and where immigration law actually comes from. Next, I'll talk about some recent changes in immigration at the federal level. Then I'll do a quick overview of your rights if you encounter um, immigration officers and how people can better prepare themselves for an encounter with immigration officers. And lastly, I'll mention a few words on how people can get involved in the fight against the detention and deportation systems in the US. So, immigration laws and policies at their core involve political decisions about who we want to be part of American society and who we want to exclude. And because of that purpose, throughout history, it has involved calculations made by people in power about who is unpopular and who people in power want to exclude from the country in that moment for some sort of political gain. And we're seeing that today as well, but that has happened throughout history. So, what that means for our immigration laws is that um, they continue to treat certain racial groups very differently from others. And to understand how we get to this point, it is very, very critical to understand the history of what led us here. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of time to go through the history today, but the broader point is that that history has really paved the path for what we are seeing today with the current administration. And I will say over the last 60 years, politicians have consistently used the framing of immigrants being a threat to public safety or a threat to national security to do two things. One, to limit the options that people have to come here for safety and stay here. And two, to give the president more authority to effectively punish people for trying to seek a better life in the US. And the Trump administration now has really made what was implicit in immigration laws for decades quite explicit. So his rhetoric and his policies are explicitly racist and they are inhumane. But what he is doing is essentially using the laws that had been passed before, that are already on the books and have been on the books for decades, to issue these discriminatory and racist, executive orders and policies. So our history and our laws really gave Trump the power to do what he's done, and presidents before him have honestly paved the path for him to do that as well. So I wanted to mention a few words about where immigration law comes from. And, some of you or most of you got that poll question correct, that immigration law itself primarily comes from Congress. That is the legislative branch of the federal government that passes laws. And the main law that's on the books is called the Immigration and Nationality Act, the INA for short. Now, once Congress passes a law under our system of government, the president and the executive branch is supposed to implement those laws. And a lot of the immigration laws that Congress has passed are quite vague, and they leave room for interpretation. And other times they actually give the president a lot of authority to do whatever the president wants on immigration. And so that's why each time we have a new president, our immigration policies change so much because even though Congress has not passed many new laws on immigration, a new president comes in and says, I interpret this law very differently from my predecessor, so I'm going to do things differently from him. And then lastly, in our federal system, we also have courts that are supposed to keep a check on the other branches. And federal courts have the power to issue decisions, to interpret laws and policies, and even declare those laws or policies unlawful. But over the last several decades, we have seen an increase in very conservative judges being on federal courts, including the Supreme Court, which makes it a lot harder for that branch to be a proper check on the system, and for them to keep a check on the government's policies, especially on immigration. And this picture just shows kind of a snapshot of how complicated our immigration system is. And this is kind of a very high level. Um, you could get into a lot more detail into this chart too. Um, but you have Congress on one side, under federal law, and under the executive branch, you have a lot of different agencies and a lot of different sub-agencies that are in charge of different things related to immigration. So one thing I wanted to highlight here is that immigration courts is where people will go for their deportation hearings, is not a part of our judicial branch, but instead is a part of our executive branch. And what this essentially means is that the president is ultimately in charge of the country's immigration courts too. And that's where people go for decisions on whether or not they will be deported. So it's really, I think, shocking to a lot of people that our immigration court system is so closely tied to the president. The other sort of big agency that is involved in immigration is DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. Under DHS, you have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, especially over these last few months. ICE is in charge of immigration enforcement, which means arrests, detention, deportations within the United States. And then you have CBP, Customs and Border Protection, which is in charge of essentially the same thing, but at or near the border, as opposed to in the interior of the country. And then lastly, um, you have another sub-agency called USCIS, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is in charge of deciding immigration benefit applications from people who are not in deportation proceedings. So, for example, if someone wants to apply for DACA, they would file an application with USCIS, or if someone is applying for asylum and they're not in deportation proceedings, they would file an application with USCIS. So, like I mentioned, there have been a lot of changes under the Trump administration. And here are some categories that I wanted to focus on. The first one is not so much a policy change, but the Trump administration understands that if they can successfully dehumanize immigrants, they can get away with a lot. It's the same playbook that we've seen throughout history in this country. And so, a lot of the rhetoric that you hear from the administration is really for the purpose of trying to get away with their cruel policies. And we're seeing a lot of pushback to those policies now, which is really great to see out in the streets, across the country. The second thing that the Trump administration has done is instituted policies to prevent people from entering the United States. So examples of those kinds of policies are, they recently issued a complete ban on entry for nationals from over a dozen countries. Um, they also have effectively cut people off from seeking asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border, and instead they are just summarily deporting people without giving them an opportunity to apply for asylum. They also ended the refugee resettlement program, which allows refugees abroad to come to the U.S. And there's an exception for white South Africans, but everyone else is barred from entering as a refugee. And then they're also slowing down the process for people to be able to migrate or for people to be able to get, their green cards, for example, or move forward with their process. So a few minutes ago, I talked about USCIS. That's the agency in charge of kind of making decisions on immigration benefit applications. For a lot of people in USCIS, their job title has actually changed, or their job description has actually changed. And instead of focusing on what they should be focusing on, they are now assisting ICE and CBP instead to help them make more arrests. And so relatedly, then the last category of change is to try to detain and deport as many people as the administration can. There have just been a lot of policy changes, like giving immigration agents more authority to go into schools and churches, for example, or actively expanding the detention system and having more contracts for detention. Um, And one sort of other recent policy that we've seen is that they are also essentially stripping people of status and then going after them. So hundreds of thousands of people who had immigration status, had work permits, lost that status overnight, and now are being targeted for arrest and detention. And over the last several weeks, we've also seen so many people show up to their immigration court hearings, for example, and instead, the ICE prosecutors are going into court asking the immigration judges to dismiss those cases, and then ICE officers are waiting for people out in the hallway to arrest them. The reason that they're asking for dismissal of those cases is because cases can take a while to proceed through the immigration court system, and ICE just wants to quickly detain and deport people. So the situation right now is very, very bleak. But what does give me hope is that there are so many people in this country, including all of you, who are here to fight for a better world. And although in the short run we are playing defensive, we are trying to protect as many people in our community as we can, but at the same time, we're also building and fighting towards that better future. And so one of the things that we can do to protect ourselves is to know our rights. Like I said, Bina is going to speak more about rights generally too, but with immigration arrests in particular, one thing to know and tell all of your family members and friends who may be worried about this is that ICE, most of the time, or immigration agencies most of the time, do not have legal authority to enter people's homes or enter private spaces without the person's consent. So there is a part of the Constitution called the Fourth Amendment, and that protects people from what are called unreasonable searches and seizures. What that means is that law enforcement, including ICE, is not allowed to enter your home without a judicial warrant or your permission. And ICE will almost never have a judicial warrant, and the judicial warrant is simply a warrant that's signed by a judge. Instead, ICE might have an administrative warrant, which you see on your screen here. And notice that although the document on your screen says warrant on the top, um, at the very top, it says it's issued by the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's not a court, it's an executive branch agency, as we just went over. And at the bottom of this warrant, it says signature of immigration officer, not a judge. So this is not a judicial warrant, and it does not give ICE authority to enter your home without your consent. And this type of warrant only gives them the power to make arrests in public, but not in any private place like your home. So you have the right to refuse to give permission to them to enter your home or any other private space if all they have is this administrative warrant. And legally, they cannot enter your home without your permission if they don't have a warrant signed by a judge. So here are some things to kind of keep in mind if ICE is at your door. Um, so if you want to sort of exercise those rights that I just talked about, important to remember not to open your door. And again, Bina, I think we'll talk a little bit more about this. But if you open the door just a little bit, they might try to push themselves in. Instead of letting ICE in, you can ask for a warrant. You can ask them to slide it under the door or show it through a window. You can ask to see their badge. Um, you can say that I do not give my consent to enter, or you do not have my permission to enter. And then you have the right to remain silent. So you can refuse to speak with officers and just say, I'm not speaking with you. I want to speak with my lawyer. And then there are these Know Your Rights cards. They're also called red cards that you can download online. If you just Google red cards, it'll pop up. They're in various languages. And, instead of asserting your rights, you can also show the card to an immigration officer. So that's another way that you can assert your rights. And so another thing I wanted to very quickly touch on is if you or a loved one is at risk of an immigration arrest, the most important thing that you can do is be prepared in advance. I know it's really hard to think about it, but having a plan in place could help you and your loved ones act as quickly as possible if something does go down. So You can think about this as planning for a natural disaster. It's not pleasant to think about, but it's important to plan ahead. The first thing that people should know is to try to find legal help now. Knowing what your options are and acting on them before a possible arrest could mean the difference between being able to stay in the US and being deported. Always, if you are talking to different attorneys, try to get two or three opinions so that you can feel comfortable with the choice that you're moving forward with. Um, and then always ask if you are talking to an attorney, ask for their bar number, make sure that they are legitimate attorneys, and not a bad actor trying to take advantage of the situation. Um, have an emergency contact outside of your household. Ideally, that person would be outside your household because if everyone in the home is impacted, someone else outside the home can step in to assist. Gather all of your important documents and store them in a single place where a friend or family member could access them. So you want to keep all of your immigration documents, birth certificate, passport, financial information, medical information, any important document like in one place. And it's not a bad idea to make copies either. So you can give one copy of that set of documents to your emergency contact, have one at home, have one, file on your computer as well, so that you have it in multiple places. Similarly, just make a list of medications and assistive devices. Get in the habit of memorizing important numbers. So an A number is a unique number that's provided to most immigrants by the government agencies. So having that memorized would be helpful, and then contact information for your emergency contact and your lawyer. Uh, I know a lot of people aren't in the habit of memorizing phone numbers anymore, but it's just helpful to have, a couple of numbers memorized because you just don't know when you may or may not have access to your phone. If you care for others, make sure you arrange for their care. It could be, a formal arrangement or an informal arrangement. So a formal arrangement could be, signing an official document under kind of the state's laws that designates the person to take care of, for example, your kids, or it could be as informal as having a conversation with a trusted person in your life and letting them know that if something were to happen to you, you would want them to take care of the person that you care for. And then also, if you have pets, just think about who would take care of them as well. Um, you'd also want to think through kind of who, how others might be able to access your bank account. And this varies by state, but people can sign what are called power of attorney forms with people that they trust so that those individuals can access their bank account, in the event that someone is arrested. And then just talk to your family members about this plan as well so that everyone is on the same page. And there are a lot of ways, if you are interested and looking to support immigrant rights, there are a lot of ways to get involved. There are tons of grassroots organizations and collectives all across the country, and they are popping up, almost every day, and people are mobilizing to provide support to their immigrant neighbors. Reach out to those groups and offer support. I am part of several of these groups, and I can tell you, you do not need a background on immigration issues. You don't need to know much about the immigration system, but everyone can contribute in meaningful ways, and that's kind of the beauty of organizing. So for example, if you have a car and can drive, there are people who are freed from detention every day who need rides back to their homes. If you are good at art, you can volunteer your time to create banners and graphics for events or fundraisers that the groups may be hosting. My point is everyone has something of value that they can offer. So please reach out to local organizations and see how you can be involved. And then here are just a list of resources. There are some Know Your Rights posters, those red cards that I talked about, a guide that goes through how to create a preparedness plan, and then other resources and trainings to different organizations as well that you can check out. And I think with that, I will stop sharing. And yeah, I think we have about 10 minutes for questions as well.
Thank you so much, Umber, for that really important presentation on navigating federal changes in immigration. I learned a lot about, sadly, the reality of having to prepare whenever ICE comes around, but also the complexities of the US legislative system and ways that we can understand it to make sure that people know that we know our own rights. We're now going to go into a 10-minute Q&A. So if you have any questions for Umber, please go ahead and put those in the chat. And we also have a Q&A box for you to utilize as well. So we're going to give people a few seconds to go ahead and get those questions in. Thank you all again for the resources, Umber, for the resource that you shared, several resources. We have another one that we're putting in the chat as well. That is a Know Your Rights flyer. So as those questions come in, I have one for you. And you talked about the travel ban, and that's something that we saw with Trump's first term. And so me, as well as some others, might be a little bit confused as to how Trump is able to do this again, especially given the last judicial decision on it from the US, from the constitutional branch. And so, can you talk a little bit about how Trump is able to do a travel ban with so many different countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you're right. Last time around, the Trump administration issued a very similar travel ban, although this time around it's a lot more, it includes a lot more countries, and the word is that it may include, they may continue to add more countries. So early on, during his first administration, when he first implemented the travel ban, there were a lot of federal courts, as you mentioned, that blocked that policy. And so people were actually able to enter for a good chunk of time. But ultimately, those cases went up on appeal. And appeals are basically, when a lower court or the first court issues a decision, you can often appeal that decision to have another court take a look at it, or a higher level court take a look at it. So those cases actually went up on appeal to the highest court in our system, the Supreme Court. And ultimately, the Supreme Court actually sided with the Trump administration and said, no, this is constitutional. And the president has this authority to enter into these, or implement these travel bans. Um, and sadly, that is the decision that we're stuck with because that is the Supreme Court's decision. And that's essentially why the Trump administration has been able to go forward with this plan. And it's unlikely that there are going to be legal challenges this time around because of that decision from last time. Um, but I did want to kind of raise, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, that law that the Trump administration used and is using for the entry bans, I think it's been on the books since at least the 1940s. And so it's not a new law that was passed. It's been a law that Congress passed, a long time ago to give the president this authority to ban entire groups of people, essentially when the president feels like it. And so, we have, and to your point, Kennedy, earlier, like we have seen this happen for decades, and it's just getting more and more cruel and in our faces every day. But this has been unfortunately the reality for immigrant populations for a long time.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really scary just seeing how whenever a new president comes into term, how there's different things that can be initiated to really oppress people. As a reminder, please utilize the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of your screen to share any questions with Umber. Another question is, how are people's status stripped from with citizenship? I think that we've seen that a lot recently, and also I think it's very frightening when people who are legal here and who have that status of citizenship are fearing that that could be removed. So can you explain how that is even legal?
Yeah, another great question. Again, very old laws in the books, but they do allow for the federal government to take away people's citizenship. But it's actually the most frequently used provisions are considered narrow. So it's essentially for things like fraud or misrepresentation. So if someone, for example, misrepresented something on their citizenship application, got their citizenship that way, And then years later, an immigration agency finds out that they lied on their application, the government does have the power to take away someone's citizenship. Um, I think with this administration, they're going to stretch the meaning of lie quite a bit to try to go after a lot of people. And we saw that a little bit in the first Trump administration. And they've even said we're going to turbocharge that program under this administration. So things like, and I think it's important to highlight that when people apply for citizenship, the application process is very extensive, right? They will ask you to identify every single group that you've ever been a part of. If someone asked me that question, I don't think I would remember every single group that I've ever been a member of, not even like held a leadership position in. And so, say someone forgets that they were part of DSA or something, or like the Food Empowerment Project, is the administration going to say that you lied on your application and try to strip your citizenship? So that's one thing to definitely look out for. Another sort of caveat to that, though, is that the process for the government kind of stripping people's citizenship is a bit more, I think, um, protective of immigrants than sort of the immigration court system. So the only way that the government can actually try to, and the technical term is denaturalize, so take away someone's naturalization, is if they file a lawsuit in federal court. Um, Generally, there are fewer protections than, for example, if it was like a criminal case where people would have the right to an appointed attorney. Um, but it is, often it's a civil case, but at the very least, they have to go through some sort of federal court process in order to take away someone's citizenship.
That's really good to know. Just understanding the process of that. So thank you for sharing. And then maybe on a lighter note, we have a couple more minutes left. If you could share a little bit about one of your most memorable cases.
Yeah, absolutely. This was actually during the first Trump administration, and I was working very closely with some organizers in Virginia who were trying to shut down a detention center, immigration detention center out here. And through sort of it was this really beautiful moment where lawyers and organizers and directly impacted people were all working together. Everyone inside the facility knew about this lawsuit. Everyone outside who were protesting knew about the lawsuit, and we were really able to come together and figure out a strategy. I was working on the legal side, but also a bit on the organizing side. And sort of long story short, we were able to get a court to we were able to show the court that the conditions inside the facility were so horrible that the court issued a ban on transfers into the facility, which led to a lot of people being released. And event from the facility's population inside essentially went from like 350 to 400 down to zero. And that was, I think, the legal part was just like a small part of it. It was really just like the incredible organizing that was happening inside and outside. So that is something that I will always sort of carry with me, especially in these times when, things are so crazy. But when we work together, we can definitely win.
I agree, Umber. Thank you so much for your time. That was such a powerful way to end such an enriching conversation. Thank you all for your questions. And Umber, I really appreciate just like the encouragement to continue this social change. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye. And there are still more resources that are being put in the chat for everyone at this moment. So some of us have seen, if not experienced, the fear of not knowing our rights. This feeling of uncertainty, isolation, and even vulnerability towards authority is an emotion that has become all too common. From students concerned about their right to learn, to the removal of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives, harmful rhetoric towards Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color, and the LGBTQ plus communities are just some ways that our freedoms are put into jeopardy. So please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Bina Ahmed, who will be speaking on upholding our rights. But before we have Bina speak, we're going to do a poll to see your knowledge on knowing your own rights. So let's go ahead and bring the poll on screen. All right, for your question, if you are stopped by the police, is it better to just explain to them the situation or just stay silent? So choice A, are you going to tell them you were on your way to the hospital? Choice B, stay silent. Choice C, tell them they are a fascist. Choice D, hand them your ID. So this might be a little tricky, but we're going to have about 10 to 15 seconds to think about the answer to this question. A very important question. All right, let's go ahead and bring the results on screen. Okay, so this is a little bit split like our first poll. So 60% said stay silent, which I would have to agree with. 20% said tell them you are on your way to the hospital, which might help in your case. Who knows? I'm not giving any advice there. And then hand them your ID, 20%. That is another option, but we're going to pass it off to Bina to talk more about why you should remain silent. But I'm going to give Bina an introduction because they are also doing such incredible work. So, Bina Ahmed, she, her, is a social justice attorney in criminal defense, civil rights, international human rights, and animal rights. She is an associate attorney with Hodsell Stormer Renick and Dye LLP, and general counsel and co chair of Muslims for Just Futures Legal Network. She serves as American Muslim Bar Association's advocacy chair, advisor to Parcio, and on Food Empowerment Project's advisory board. Thank you so much, Bina, for all you've done for FEP. She has worked with several Palestine advocacy organizations, including the Center for Constitutional Rights, the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, Jewish Voice for Peace, Al Haq and Badil, and animal rights organizations. As you listen to Bina, reflect on ways that you could better equip yourself with knowledge to take a stand against oppressive systems. Welcome, Bina. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me. I love the results of that poll. I was hoping somebody might even just as a joke pick, tell them they're fascist, but yes, no, you definitely shouldn't do that. And also just want to uplift again Umber's presentation. She is definitely indeed a powerhouse. And just give her lots of love. You can imagine how much immigration attorneys, especially incredible ones who are as caring and as thorough and as brilliant as Umber, how overwhelmed they are. So really just want to give her her flowers and her love. I'm going to share my screen and I hope let me know. I won't be able to see, I think, the sort of the webinar of folks once I do this, but hopefully this will work and hopefully I can do it in presenter mode once I share it. Okay, so I think that works now. Okay. As Kennedy said, my name is Bina Ahmed. I use she, her pronouns. I'm really honored to be here with you all today. Given these Know Your Rights presentations is just really tough, especially in these times, but it's always tough. As I think a lot of folks, naturally you're taught in school, you have these rights and you can assert them and, you have the right to not be racially profiled or to, and you're going to hear a lot of pessimistic sort of talk from a 20-year veteran lawyer at this point, where that to me is really not what the law or the legal system is. What I'm hoping to do here is just sort of arm you with knowledge and language, because for me, the U.S. legal system is a system of power colonialism. It's built to uphold white supremacy and colonialism and to put profit over people and animals. And it's particularly important for us to understand why this is important also for folks who are in the animal rights movement. There's a wide range of politics, within our movement. And, hopefully my presentation, at least the beginning of it, will put into context of why it's really important for us to be fighting these criminal systems, even as animal liberation activists and especially as animal liberation activists. So, well, the main thing is that, like I said, our animal liberation movement opposes these same systems of state power and white supremacist capitalism that the abolitionist movements against prison and police oppose. And so part of that is this white supremacist capitalist system is the main goal is that it wants to uphold profit and the most powerful industries. So we, as folks who care about animals and care about having cross-movement solidarity, we're up against the most powerful systems in the world. They make more money than oftentimes in war manufacturing weapons companies. These animal industries. So they have an immense, amount to lose, and they have an immense interest to try to suppress our speech and to suppress, what we're trying to say. And that really goes hand in hand because honestly, without these legal systems and without, this power of using the law to suppress and to, and stomp on people, it would be much harder to maintain the animal industry as it is, right? Because it's not only, the suppressed knowledge and suppressed people being able to know about it, but they do that by criminalizing, right? Like, filming on, slaughterhouses or, factory farms now. They do it by criminalizing, even just protesting by, so these things are all they're held up because of this violent system of our criminal system. It wouldn't really work if people weren't threatened with jail and prosecution and losing their liberty, right? That's really the biggest fear mongering that you can do on a movement. And so much so, our movements have been labeled at one point by the FBI. They were the #1 domestic terrorist threat. And I see that like in quotes too, because I don't want to adopt the state's language of like terror. And that's really like, that's a government language, that's a government term. But just the fact that FBI, would of course like look at social justice movements, also like BLM and whatnot as the biggest domestic threat, not, not like QAnon folks, not white supremacy, of course not ICE. And so that just shows also like how important having this strong criminal system is and having really powerful law enforcement is to suppressing our speech and to keeping animals in their place. And so, part of this is also, it's very interconnected, the use of animals in these prison and policing systems and law enforcement systems. It goes all the way back to slave times of using slave hounds to hunt and to seize and maul to death, oftentimes freed or, escapee slaves who are seeking their freedom. And then, of course, these same dogs and the same like technology and the way they would train the dogs and whatnot, use them, and just also the racist fear mongering of having, and I have a German Shepherd, so this breaks my heart, but using mostly German Shepherds to chase after folks of color and to maul them. Using the civil rights movement, you see in the photo, of course, very classic, very historical image of a German Shepherd, biting a protester. And then you see, dogs and policing, how much it's expanded today. They're used every day in law enforcement, and oftentimes, to maul people either to death or, to maim them permanently. And, not only are these animals being forced to be these weapons of the state, right? We've seen these horses, being used, as they often have been by ICE in these LA protests, to, really intimidate folks with those giant animals. But they also, of course, suffer themselves, right? They don't have a choice to be in this position. Especially dogs are trained to be loyalty humans. So to train a dog to then attack and maul someone, is a horrible thing. And horses are prey animals. They're terrified of crowds and noise. So they don't have a choice, right, to be part of this, but also the criminal system will use them as weapons of the state. So, but of course we want to fight that, right? They're not weapons, nothing should be a weapon. But we want to show that like there is solidarity amongst the movements that we're trying to uphold is in abolishing police and prisons and the legal system as a whole, but also abolishing the use of animals in them, because animals have been very key to building up our law enforcement to what it is today, right? Without modern weapons, how were, law enforcement and like slave patrols who became law enforcement able to terrorize and to suppress people? And that was through using dogs and horses. And this is just one more slide about abusive canine practices, dog practices of how they train them. Oftentimes law enforcement will give you this image of, we love our dogs, they're officers, we give them this big honorary funeral. And that's all complete crap, because they abuse their dogs to do this work. They sacrifice their lives without their choice to send them into buildings and situations they don't actually want to be in. And they're ultimately property and they're discarded at the end of the day. And there's like honorary funeral. It does nothing for the dog. They don't have a choice to be an employee. It's more that it's more of an insult to folks, particularly Black folks, right? Of like, we're going to honor this dog, but not your death. And finally, just, I have one more after this too. I want to uplift this like that animals also, in the way that people are resisting law enforcement and violence, animals are resisting too, right? And there's often, many of us often say, well, animals are voiceless, and they're not voiceless, right? They are voicing their opposition and their desire for liberation. They literally, cops literally go, obviously this is one of the St. Louis Six, I think, who then ultimately were liberated and are now in a sanctuary. Where they have to keep, these animal industries, in line, or it's like uplifted. And so they're of course going to then send police to capture runaway, factory farm animals. And oftentimes these animals fight back. They will fight back when they take their babies. They will, of course, like circus elephants will stomp people to death. I was living for the moments when the orcas were sinking all the ships, and cows will obviously escape slaughterhouses and run for their lives and physically resist. And so they are part of our resistance. And then just the last thing is just sort of like how the FBI is sort of like, of course, then like clamping down on that, right? Is like, I'm sure folks heard about this, sort of like sending the FBI to find two piglets. Like, what are we doing? Like, really? And but of course, really, right? Because that it's not just about finding the piglets. So what precedent does that set? Because here we heard from our people, remember Cedar's or Cedar the goat, who was a 4-H goat for this young girl who then she loved and became her pet, and then she didn't want to kill him, and law enforcement literally came and took the goat and killed him. And that's not because they needed that one goat, right? It's because what message would it send? It would start to crumble their empire if they didn't enforce animals as property, right? And police and law enforcement are key to holding that system up. So, so when we talk about, knowing your rights, it's really just about, it's not going to make it bulletproof, right? And we've seen, it's like, what does the law even mean anymore? Like many lawyers are also just questioning it. For me, it's just the language of the colonizer, and it's a language that I needed to know. I'm a daughter of a colonized family. My father grew up during the British occupation of India, and they had to learn English to survive under their occupier. And so for me, the US legal system is the occupying body and power. And I needed to understand it. And I want to also give others the knowledge to just use it as one of the tools in your toolbox. Not that it's a liberation tool, but you just need to know it, right? And know how to exercise it. And, one of the main things is like, rather than just like a general, like, here are your rights kind of training, is what I often try to focus on, is that so much of this 90% of what I want to teach you and what I want to show you is preparation ahead of time, right? Before you get to a protest, before FBI comes to your door, before you're facing an ICE raid. There's so much that you need to do now, even if you don't think you're at risk, is because nobody really is prepared for when the door gets busted open by the police or to get arrested suddenly. And then it's really too late to do a lot of this stuff. So it's important to have your politics in check and knowing your privilege and the way that you interact with law enforcement, especially when you go to protests. Is oftentimes if you can take risks to agitate law enforcement, they may not take out their aggression on you, but they'll take it out on someone behind you. They'll take it out on Black and brown folks behind you who they know are weaker and easier targets. Know that what you say and you do is not just about you. That, yeah, of course, a lot of people think I'm not saying anything wrong or doing anything wrong. And that's true, but it's not about the truth, and it's not about right and wrong, right? It's really about thinking strategically of how can this be used against me and my communities and my family and my movement, right? What I say will be attributed to those around me or the march I'm a part of or the group I'm a part of. And then most importantly is you have to protect each other, is that we are stronger together. All of this only works, if we're strongest as our weakest link. It's only going to work if we work together on it. It's not helpful if I have the best digital security and I know not to talk to cops. I was a criminal defense attorney for a long time. If, if my husband or if my family like doesn't know that and they're giving up their data and talking to cops, well, that's my data too, right? That's like if they give up all the stuff that I've said, it doesn't matter how safe I was. They have to center me and I have to center them as well. So like I was saying, a lot of it is getting ready before you even go out to protest. So things like, and I know everyone has a smartphone now, so very, very few people memorize numbers or dial them even, but memorizing at least one emergency phone number or writing it in permanent marker on your arm, because they will take your phone right away when you're arrested. Operating on a buddy system. Don't go alone to a protest, but if you have to, at least have someone who you've told, okay, I'm going to this protest, I will check in with you again at the end. And if I don't, start calling people, right? Like I've been disappeared, just so that someone knows how that they need to look for you. Keep private things private in your home, in your office, also on your phone. Phones are, mini computers, right? And they carry everything in our entire lives, on them. So you have to protect your phone and your data the way that you would protect your house, and the way you protect, your person. Your phone has everything on it, not just about you, but everyone you're in contact with and everybody you work with. And so, things like turning off the Face ID, just deleting that from your phone, is really important. I don't know if many phones have like the thumbprint unlock anymore, but if it does, turning that off, because police will just use that, hold the phone to your face and open it, right? And you have to protect that data. You have to be careful what you say in texts and emails and chats and whatnot. Many people rightfully should be using Signal, but Signal, like any other app, is only as secure as you make it. And so if you don't have automatic delete set up on your text messages within Signal, within your threads, it's just there forever. And if you can open your phone and see a message, someone else like law enforcement can too. And so you have to also operate very securely on Signal. It's only secure in the sense that it isn't, it can't be intercepted when it sends the message from phone to phone, right? But if it's still on your phone, it's like any other text. Other things like carrying valid ID if you have it. Umber, I know, touched a lot on this, but if you have a valid ID, carry that. If you are if you're a person who's an immigrant and not a citizen but has lawful status, carry your immigration papers. If you are undocumented, do not carry your foreign passport. And I think Umber might have touched on this, is don't carry your foreign passport if you're undocumented, because all that does is lets law enforcement speed your deportation, right? Because it's their burden and the state's burden to find out your lawful status and then where they're supposed to deport you to, right? And if you make that easy for them and you have your Mexican passport, very quickly they're like, well, we know, straight this way, we know exactly where you're going to go. And it also helps them prove, perhaps that's where you have status and not here. Carrying important medication and its original pharmacy container. Everything that you have on you will likely be taken from you when you're arrested, but sometimes you can negotiate, especially if you have a heart condition or HIV positive or diabetic, to either take your dose before they take it, or to prove, later sometimes they'll take you to the hospital where a doctor has prescribed the same medicine, but you can prove to them like, this is my medication, right? So pharmacy on there is my doctor, this is the dose, everything. So that makes it easier for you then to access your medication perhaps even later. Clear any open warrants. Oftentimes people don't realize that warrants are not just sort of fleeing the jurisdiction, in this dramatic sort of like escape scene. It's anything like where if you got, like in New York, it is, you can't ride your bike on the sidewalk and they'll ticket you if you do, right? It's not a crime, right? It's just like it's a violation, it's not a crime. But if you don't answer that ticket, you don't pay it, that turns into a warrant. That means that if you have a warrant in New York for just an unpaid, bike ticket, and you're in California and you get arrested, you will be held in without bail, without release, and sent to New York via train or bus or car, however they want to take you to answer for that warrant, even if it's just an unpaid ticket. And so you have to make sure that all of those things are taken care of, because that is the worst thing, is when you have what's called a fugitive warrant or out of jurisdiction warrant. It is very hard to help people and to get them out, out of jail. Another thing is know that you can calmly document and film police and FBI and film their activity. It's hard, I know, calmly sometimes when things are crazy and things are running around in a protest and people are screaming. It's really hard, I know. But to the extent you can, realizing if you're filming, your video is only as good as I can, as an attorney, like use it in court, for instance. It's for other reasons too, but it's harder for your attorney to use the video if it's, you're shaking the camera around, it can't quite hear, you're screaming, you might be swearing at the cops, which I know, I understand the sentiment, but like in court doesn't always help. But doing it from a safe distance as well, because you yourself can get arrested for interfering if you get in the way, right, with your video. And while you're videoing, recording, try to ask them, if you're especially filming someone's getting arrested, try to ask their name and their birth date, if they say if we can give it to you, so that you can track them or someone can track them through the system. Trying to film officer badges and names. ICE is very good at hiding that now. Some people try to ask them, of course, but they often just don't want to tell you. So, but just getting the information, just trying to think of how this might be helpful later. So things that you don't want to do. The main thing you don't want to do is you do not want to lie to law enforcement. That whether it's the local police or especially if it's the FBI, any white lie can and is a crime, can be a crime and is a crime, especially if you lie to the FBI. Any small lie to the FBI is a federal crime. It's punishable by up to 8 years in prison. And what happens is oftentimes prosecutors and police and FBI will use the threat of prosecuting you for that lie to force you to cooperate with them. And that's how they get people to flip, right? And so it's best, like people have selected, at least the majority did in the poll, to stay silent, and I'll tell you how to do that. Other things like don't carry weapons or drugs or fake IDs, a lot of cash, things that you don't want the police to see. Know that everything that you say in a police car, in lockup, is recorded. Everything you say on the phone from jail is recorded. So don't say anything you don't want the police and FBI to hear. Don't talk to FBI or police about your immigration status. Don't leave your phone unlocked or leave it with Face ID. And of course, don't carry your foreign passport if you're undocumented. So the general rule of when you encounter law enforcement is to minimize your contact with law enforcement. It's really hard because we're activists, and so we want to fight and we want to debate people, and want to convince them and whatnot. And you have to realize when you're facing law enforcement, you're facing the state. Even if they're a single officer, they represent the state. You're not going to convince them to go vegan. You're not going to convince them to support Palestine. Even if you do, who cares? They're cops. So really, it's about minimizing your contact, because talking to them is only going to hurt you. It doesn't help you to give them more information or open up a channel of communication. No one really ever is able to talk their way out of an arrest. As much as we think we can, and as much as we see it on TV and think, I wouldn't fall for that, you're not dumb if you do. It's that law enforcement are trained to pressure you and to terrify you. But, teaching you this hopefully will get you to calm yourself and know you can just say, couple these same phrases and nothing else. You have something at least to say, and try to stop yourself from saying too much. So the first level of interacting with law enforcement, is what we call the initial sort of stop. Like FBI, either can come to your door or stop you on the street. ICE can, local cops can. And, rather than start to scream at them or run away, what I usually recommend, especially if it's on the street, is just answering the questions in like 5 words or less, like basic questions, right? And now I know I said you don't have to talk to them about anything, but, if you think try to put your mind in the mind of a cop. They come up to you like, hey, just have a question. If you're like, I'm not talking to my lawyer and I'm not, I didn't do anything. I'm invoking my right to remain silent. It's a little like, okay, oh, okay. So something might have happened. It just escalates it when it maybe doesn't need to be escalated, this encounter. So the first level, and we'll talk about other levels as it does escalate, is they might stop you answering basic questions, 5 words or less, basic biographical questions like my name's Vina, I'm going home, things like that are benign, if they're asking them. You do not have to hand over your ID. And I know sometimes people think that you do. If you're stopped in a car, you do. But on the street, and especially if they come to your house and whatnot, you don't. But it is up to you to decide how to use what I teach you, because sometimes people will feel like maybe it's safer. I don't just fight them on everything. I have a valid ID. Maybe I should just give that to them. They'll, find out who you are eventually if they arrest you. If you feel safe to do that and it's not, like a fake ID or whatnot, it's your judgment and you can do that. But so after you've, answered these basic questions, they stop you on the street, or if they, come to your work, and I'll go over if they come to your house, you have to ask this first set of magic words I'm going to teach you, which is, am I free to leave? Am I free to leave? So, they stop me. What's your name? My name's Bina. Am I free to leave? Because they're not going to dismiss you, right? Like they will, if you're, which many people do, they freeze when they're scared. So if you're not going to ask them, they're happy to have you just stand there and pressure you to talk, right? Because they want you to talk. So you have to ask affirmatively if you're free to leave, right? So am I free to leave? So if they say yes, calmly walk away, right? Now, if they say no, then the interaction is sort of like a higher level, right? It's more than the initial interaction. So if they say no, you want to ask, well, are you detaining me? Right? Because if I'm not free to leave, are you detaining me? And that's the next set of magic words. Now, it would make sense that if you're not free to leave, they're detaining you, right? You want to check, but also they will try to mess with you sometimes. I've had this happen to me where they told me I wasn't free to leave, and I said, okay, are you detaining me? And they said, no. And so then, what do I do? So then you just go back to the first set, but it's like a level of steps. So I'll go back down a step and say, okay, so then am I free to leave? And then they said no. I was like, are you detaining me? They said no. And we just like went in a circle like this until they got annoyed and let me go. Because all I gave them was these magic words, right? I didn't give them information. So, but for our purposes, we're going to assume that they're going to say, no, you're not free to leave, right? So and yes, we're detaining you. So if they're detaining you, the purpose of detention is to investigate, to get information, to get you to talk. Now, you can't physically fight them, nor should you, and you can't just run away. It's going to escalate the situation. But at the same time, while you physically have to stand there, you want to tell them, like, this detention is going to be meaningless. We can stare at each other. I'm not giving you more information. So after you've confirmed, okay, yeah, so I'm not free to leave. I'm being detained. Okay, well, I wish to remain silent. I wish to remain silent. That's the next set of magic words. What you're communicating is that this detention is meaningless. You can stare at me all you want. You can hold me here. I can't physically go anywhere, but you can't force me to talk, and I'm not going to. Right? So, do what you do. And at this point, your brain will be racing and you'll be scared, and it's really hard to slow that down. Try for a second, especially when now you have to stay there, to observe your surroundings. Like, where are you? Are there people watching who could be witnesses? Are you in front of like a street camera? Just stuff that later could help if you're arrested and if you're, taken to court. So at this point in a detention, and a lot of times this can go out of order, but for our purposes, we're going to assume now you've been detained. So now they're going to try to frisk you, right? Like you may say, I'm not talking, or I wish to remain silent. And they're like, okay, great. Well, we're going to pat you down. They have the power. I always say not the right, but the power. People have rights. Police have power. They have the power to pat you down on your external clothing to see if you have weapons. It's for their quote unquote safety, which is ridiculous. So you can't physically resist this, nor should you. It's very dangerous too. But at the same time as you should physically comply, if they're like, put your arms out, put your legs out, like, okay. At the same time that you're doing that, you need to say the next set of magic words, which is, I do not consent to a search. I do not consent to a search. That might seem counterintuitive, or you're like, yeah, here, okay, I don't consent to a search. what you're showing is that I'm physically complying, but I'm not giving up my legal right to challenge this later. And if you don't say anything, then you are giving up your legal right to challenge it. Silence is consent under our really gloriously messed up system. And so you have to try to find the words while it's going really fast, you're scared, they're touching you. It's like, but I do not consent to a search. And then just keep saying that. If they try to go into your bag, they try to get you to unlock your phone, don't physically fight them looking in your bag, but keep saying I don't consent. Definitely do not unlock your phone, no matter what you do for the officers, and just keep saying I don't consent, but don't physically resist. At this point, we're going to assume that an arrest is going to come in, right? So we've been stopped. It's like, well, we asked, am I free to leave? They said, no. Are you detaining me? Yes. Then we said, okay, well, I wish to remain silent. And they're like, okay, great. Well, we're going to pat you down anyway. And while they do, you say, I don't consent to a search, but I'm not physically fighting, right? I don't consent to a search. And then at this point, let's assume that an arrest kind of comes into play. They might just choose for whatever reason, everyone can make it up that they're going to arrest you. This is of course like the highest level. So if you remember nothing else from this training, just remember the last set of magic words, even before they put the cuffs on you, before they read you your Miranda rights. They don't have to read you your rights really in a lot of jurisdictions anymore. Everyone knows those rights. They assume that they do, even though oftentimes people don't invoke them because they're scared. But you try to be not one of those people, right? Even though you're scared, you want to try to remember the most important set of magic words. If you forget everything else, is I'm not talking without a lawyer. I'm not talking without a lawyer, right? So that puts like a Star Wars sort of force field shield over you that they now are not legally supposed to try to question you anymore, right? They can't keep pressuring you now. They might try, but all you keep saying is I'm not talking without a lawyer. And that means like don't talk to cellmates, don't say anything on calls. You can talk to your lawyer confidentially, but I would still be careful what you say on the call. Don't write anything or whatnot. And that also means then you have to stay silent. If you don't stay silent, if you start the conversation, that is not police questioning you, right? They can talk to you if you open the conversation. And so what that does is that Star Wars force field kind of comes down, right? You pierce it if you say, I'm not talking without a lawyer, but I want to tell you one thing, right? It just goes, now you've poked the bubble, right? You no longer have that protection because then they're like, sure, well, what about that? And then they'll start talking to you. If you do that, even if you forget, you can immediately be like, oh, wait, actually, never mind. I'm not talking without a lawyer. And that's your shield going back up. Even if they try, especially as your lawyer, then we can challenge if they kept trying to question you after you invoked your right to silence and to counsel. So your right to, not talk and then without a lawyer. And you have to say those two things together. They're two separate rights, and it's important to say them together. So, but not talking without your lawyer, when you're arrested, you should still give them like your name when they're booking you. They might ask like your age and where you're, like if you have a health issue that you need them to know. But like the sort of talking without a lawyer is really like anything else of substance. So just to recap, just to put it in this, form is like, if you're stopped, you ask, am I free to leave, right? If you're not free to leave, are you detaining me? If they are detaining you, you say, I wish to remain silent. And then if they pat you on a search, you say, I don't consent to a search. And then if they arrest you, you say, I'm not talking without a lawyer. And then you stay silent. I'm going to skip through this because Umber covered this a lot, and I covered a lot about sort of like not carrying, fake ID or whatnot. But just, know if we think our criminal system is messed up, our immigration system is even more messed up. Really briefly, just a couple more slides so same principles if law enforcement comes to your home or to your workplace. So, but like you don't have to talk to them, but the main thing you need to do is you need to keep the door closed, right? So that's the most important thing. So you gotta knock at the door. You want to keep the door closed. You don't want to immediately open it because they'll just start to walk in, and you want to check if they're law enforcement, right? So first, if they look like law enforcement, then they are, but just obviously if they're ICE is often wearing plain clothes, you want to ask who they are. Now, if they say it's law enforcement, it's law enforcement, you immediately ask, do you have a warrant, right? So you don't start talking, they'll start to try and ask you questions like, oh, we just want to talk to you, get to know people in the neighborhood, there's some emergency things happening. They've used all these excuses before, in my cases. And so you just want to first ask, do you have a warrant? Now, a warrant can be an arrest warrant or a search warrant. Now, an arrest warrant is to arrest a person, right? A search warrant is to search the place, so your home. So if they say they have any type, or if they don't have any kind of warrant, right? If they're just like, no, we just want to talk to you, then you don't open the door, right? You don't have no legal obligation to open the door. And I really recommend you don't, because then they'll look at everything in your house. And my house, I'm sure, has many things that are radical that I would not want law enforcement to see. But still try to remember to ask for them to slide their business cards under the door, and that you'll have your lawyer contact them. Because one, that shows like you're going to invoke counsel, right? They can't just keep coming back. But two, if you have the business card, then if you call somebody like me as a lawyer, I know who to call to say, hey, you can't go back to this person's house without going through me. I'm invoking their right to silence or the right to an attorney. And that protects you, right? And it also lets me get more information about like what agency are they from. Like oftentimes people call me and be like, the FBI were here. And I was like, okay, great, what division? Right? Like counterterrorism, DEA, like, they often don't know because they didn't get the business card, right? And then I also don't know who to call. So really important to do that. Now, if they do have a warrant, let's say that they have a search warrant. Now remember, this is to search the location. Again, ask them to slide the warrant under the door. So before, if they didn't have something, still get their business card under the door. If they say they have a warrant, ask them to slide the warrant under the door. Don't open the door so you can look at the warrant. Now, warrants have to be signed by a judge, not an immigration official or administrative official. Have to be signed by a judge. It has to be for the right address and the right date. So if it is valid, if it's signed by a judge for the right address or date, you have to let them in legally. But still say, I'm not talking without a lawyer. You can also still say, I do not consent to a search, not like come right this way and look through all my things, but like, okay, I can't stop you from coming in my house, but I'm not talking without a lawyer. I don't consent to a search. You can follow them and film or take notes if you feel safe enough to do so, but don't interfere. And of course, if the warrant isn't valid, you can say that. Just I would take a picture of the warrant before sliding it back to them if they ask for it back. But just say like, this warrant, is it valid? I'm not talking without a lawyer, and then slide your business card under the door, right? So always making sure to get that information. If they have an arrest warrant, that is just for a person, right? So an arrest warrant then means that they can come and arrest somebody, but it's not a search warrant. So you don't want to let them in to arrest somebody if they're home, right? One, you want to ask them again to slide the warrant under the door, make sure it's for the right person, they are there, they live there, whatnot. And if it's you, step outside and surrender. And announce that I'm stepping outside to surrender, right? Because if you let them in, they're going to start searching your house as well, even though they only had an arrest warrant. Because now they're in, how are you going to stop them? So you need to make sure whoever the warrant is for the arrest warrant, they step outside and surrender. Of course, again, if it's incorrect, if the person doesn't live there, it's the wrong address, you say that and then ask them to slide their business cards under the door, and that you'll have your lawyer contact them, which can be me. That is, and I know I went through a lot, but I wanted to make sure that I cover as much as I can. And let me just stop my screen share. I think I did. Hang on. Yeah, there we go. So I will stop there. I know I gave you a ton of stuff, but I would love to hear any questions or comments folks have.
Thank you again so much, Vina, for your time and for that really, really powerful discussion. I learned so much about how I can take a stand for my rights. And as a pre-law major, a lot of that stuff was just like clicking, especially ask for a lawyer if you ever find yourself in legal trouble. That is such a big one. So thank you. We're now going to go into a 10-minute Q&A. So please put any questions you have in the Q&A box down below. And let's get Vina some good questions. One question I have for you is, you were talking about when ICE comes knocking at your door, or if you are at a protest or some event and you find yourself being encountered by the police. If things start getting violent, even after you invoke your rights and they don't like that answer, what are some ways that you can handle that? If it's escalating or just doing something to make sure that you're in the least amount of trouble?
That's really hard, and it's a really good question. So everything I'm going to say is I hate saying it, right? Because you have the right to, like, morally right to resist, to be enraged. Like, these people are killing our communities left and right with complete impunity, right? So when I give you advice on like what you should do legally, it's to give you the safest route to keep you physically safe and legally safe to get you out safely. That doesn't mean like politically I'm going to judge folks, if they choose to do something else, but just so folks know sort of like what can happen. And things will often get violent, even if you invoke your rights and you're, cooperating and whatnot. I mean, if they get violent, against you, I mean, the most important thing you can do is just not resist. And that's really hard, right? Someone is attacking you, is beating you, is terrifying you. The most, the safest thing you can do is not resist, and also say, I'm not resisting, I'm complying, I'm not armed, like I'm not resisting, my hands are up, because also it could be a scuffle and it's really hard to see what's going on, and someone might be filming what's happening to you, and you kind of want to also narrate that. Now that's really hard to think of. I don't think I would even think at the moment if police are like beating me and choking me, if I would think, oh, I want to narrate what I'm doing. But to the extent folks can, right, not physically like resisting, right, and just putting your hands up and again saying, I'm not resisting, I'm not armed, I'm not a threat, and I'm complying.
That's really good advice. And I'm sure it's hard in the heat of the moment, but I think we should all try our best to keep ourselves safe.
Yeah.
And then another question is from Nicole in the chat, and they asked, what are the rules for Canada? So if you have maybe any input for Canada, I know we're focused on the US, but are the rules similar or laws? Anything?
That I do not know. I mean, I wish I did. Yeah, so I can't advise on Canada. I mean, I think this is in general, like, we all often like international travel too. You can't know every country's laws, but I think like these sort of basic principles of minimizing contact, always trying to de-escalate something, I think are just universal. Like it doesn't help us to argue and to like get law enforcement more agitated. Even if we're in the right, with what we're saying, it doesn't help us to start yelling at them or whatnot. Just like how do you kind of take the temperature down so that you can walk away safely? It's really kind of like I think the universal principle that I would apply.
That's a great answer. And someone in the chat asked, Gavin, they said, what does ICE dress like? I think that they're trying to get to the point that maybe they've seen ICE in their neighborhood and they just want to
Yeah.
know what they look like. I've even seen some social media pictures and videos where it seems like ICE is like a normal person, but they're acting very different. So if you could share anything,
Yep.
I'll be.
That's a brutal question because they can dress like anybody. They can wear their uniforms, but also not even ICE, but like police and FBI can be undercover, right? And that's like a very like common tactic that they use. And so they'll dress like a regular person, so you don't know that they're law enforcement. I think what this, answer or this question really brings up for me is being careful about what we say, especially to folks that we don't know. And also getting to know the folks in our group and not just, I mean, I'm also kind of a hermit, but like getting out and getting to know the folks you're organizing with, because then if someone is off and new and you don't know them, your radar will go up a little bit more. Versus if you don't know anybody, kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I hate the police too. And like, you don't want to start talking to someone you don't really know well. Even if they don't have ill intentions, you just have no idea where that can lead. And so I think we're at and trusting your gut. If something feels off, someone feels off, they feel they're asking too many questions about like, we need to escalate the situation, we need to rise up, just like you don't have to engage, right? And I know it's hard when they're plain clothes to kind of tell people like to constantly just be careful of everybody, but I also think that's kind of the state that we're in, is needing to really be careful all around, what we say in public, who we talk to, and what we say to people. But yeah, unfortunately, they can look like anybody.
Which is scary, but we know to
Yeah.
stay vigilant after that wonderful presentation. One other question we have, so do police officers or ICE, part of the agency, do they have any training on dealing with people with disabilities or who are neurodiverse? And if so, do you have any tips for people that might encounter the police if they have those identifiers?
Yeah, I mean, so they're trained. Yeah, they're trained on a lot of things, right? They're trained on like to not use certain amount of force, to not racially profile. I mean, they're trained on all these things that they just don't really care about. Like there's a formal training on the books that they do to sort of cover themselves, and then there's just like what they actually do, which is their practice. So yes, that they're trained, but they will, as we've seen, like especially folks who call 911 for a mental health crisis, it's almost the deadliest thing you can do because they don't care, right? Even when they have notice, right, that this person is having a mental health episode, they'll come in guns blazing. And so, I think that I wouldn't rely on them, sort of like being sensitive and reading the situation. I think for folks who are neurodiverse or have different disabilities or who are maybe deaf or like have things that are like really make it difficult to communicate with law enforcement, I know, and I've deferred to those communities and sort of like how they navigate the world. I know that some communities will either like even carry a card that either says like I'm deaf or I'm neurodiverse, just something so that you can quickly kind of like show that, right? So it's not as like I'm trying to communicate, but I can't communicate and I'm scared. And it's even harder when you're neurodiverse or if you have a different ability. So that's something I've seen folks do. But and also like letting people in their neighborhood know or their friends know, or like wearing bracelets. Like for instance, like I've gone into, anaphylactic shock several times. And so like I've considered like wearing a bracelet in case that happens so that, like if medical personnel come, that they know what to do. So it's just like that, like of something that's really quick and not incriminating, but that can be identified as like a signifier, like, oh, okay, this person has this issue. I don't know if that helps, but yeah.
Definitely helped. Thank you so much. I believe that this is concluding our Q&A. Those were such great questions, you all, and things that I think about a lot. So super powerful conversation. Thank you for breaking down those complex themes. And I took notes the entire time, so I really appreciate it. Thank
Oh,
you,
great.
Sabina.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, you all. Thank you.
Everyone can check out some really cool links in the chat about knowing your rights as a student, immigrant rights, or if you're stopped by the police, just continue to grow on that knowledge. So, food is power, and it can be used as a social tool to unite, but also to control. Our food system is built on exploitative and forced labor and is not equitable, and it causes many people to live a life of struggle. For over 18 years, FUP has advocated to bridge that gap and promote a better quality of life for farmers, animals, and marginalized communities. Food can be synonymous with health, equity, culture, and compassion, and we can all fight to make this a reality. Our next speaker, Lauren Ornelas, will be speaking on encouraging food justice. But before we get started with that lovely presentation, we're going to put a poll on screen so that you can test your knowledge on food justice issues. So the question is, what is the most significant barrier for marginalized communities to access healthy foods in the US? Is it choice A, there is a lack of healthy foods grown in the US? Choice B, healthy foods are not being imported at high rates? Choice C, many BIPOC people are not being paid a living wage? Or choice C, not enough foods? So we're going to give 15 seconds for this question so you can think hard about it. And we'll go ahead and start now. All right, it's been about 15 seconds. Let's go ahead and bring the poll on screen. Your answers. Okay, so we got 86% of people that said many BIPOC people are not being paid a living wage, and that is correct. FEP has created several different food reports, and through them within the California area, the constant answer was that people are not being paid a living wage to buy healthy fresh fruits and vegetables. So while not enough stores might be a reality for some people, we do find that living wage is a really big issue. And so we're excited to have Lauren talk more about this. Lauren Ornelas, she, her, is FEP's founder and general programs team member. Lauren has been active in the animal rights movement for 37 years. She's the former executive director of Viva USA, a national nonprofit advocacy organization that Viva UK asked her to start in 1999. While Lauren was the director of Viva USA, she investigated factory farms and ran consumer campaigns. In cooperation with activists across the country, she also persuaded Trader Joe's to stop selling all duck meat and achieved corporate success within Whole Foods Market, Pier 1 Ports, and others. She helped halt the construction of industrial dairy operation in California. And Lauren was also the spark that got the founder of Whole Foods Market to become a vegan. Already so incredible. In addition, she served as a campaign director with the Silicon Valley Toxics Coalition for 6 years. You can also watch Lauren's TEDx talk on the power of our food choices to learn more. As you listen to Lauren, please think about ways that your food choices can make a positive impact. Thank you, Lauren, for being here.
Thank you, Kennedy, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I am going to show my presentation. If I can find it. Here we go. All right. Sorry, still learning this. If anybody does Canva, I'm still learning Canva. Okay, I think I got it. All right, everybody. Oops. So, as everybody knows, things are really difficult right now. I would say they're heartbreaking, they're enraging, and they're really depressing. And so, what I've tried to do is just really try to figure out ways to think about how we can still have hope and how look at all the different ways we have power. And Food Empowerment Project was created with the term food is power in our name because I believe truly that we hold so much power with our food choices. We just need to know when to wield it and how to wield it. So, one of the first things I want to talk about is looking way back in the 1790s, women in England didn't have the right to vote, and many of them were opposed to enslaving people in Western Africa, enslaving people in the Caribbean who were harvesting sugar. Um, so these are women who didn't have the right to vote. They didn't have any power. They were seen as powerless. And so, because of their desire to not support what was happening, they had to come up with creative ways in which to show power, ways in which to voice their disgust as what their country was involved in. And what they decided to do was boycott sugar. So, for me, at a time right now when we do not really have, I'm going to say, quite frankly, I don't think we have control on much of anything. We don't have any control over what the president does. We don't have really any control over the courts. I know when this person was, I can't say his name, when this person was reelected, that a lot of organizations were saying, well, we have the courts, we have the courts. I don't think we have the courts. I don't think we have much of anything. And so we have to figure out the ways in which we can wield power. And for me, this is such a beautiful, brilliant example of how people, how women who were being forced to be seen as powerless wielded power. They didn't need the permission of the government. They didn't need anybody's permission. They used their power of how they purchase things for their homes. And I don't mean to ever make it seem as if um, we can shop our way out of these problems or that it's all about the dollar. What it's about is our collective voices together and us making sure we are respecting campaigns and boycotts that are called by others in order to create effective change. So, one of the other ways, which many people I hope have heard about, is the Great Boycott in the 1960s. And this was started by Larry Itliong, who was a Filipino farm worker, and he wanted to try to figure out a way to get farm worker rights. And he eventually brought on people like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta to the boycott. And what they were saying here again is that the government is showing us they do not care about how we're treated. They do not care about farm workers. They see us as less than. And so they came up with a way to show collective voices being disgusted by how farm workers are being treated and came up with a way for people to participate. And the way that people were asked to participate was to boycott grapes. And this was taking place around the country, but it also sprouted up in other places around the world where people knew by buying grapes, you were saying you didn't care about how farm workers were treated. So again, when we talk about the government wielding power, whether it be explicit or implicit power, one of the things that was done was at the time that the Great Boycott was going on, Ronald Reagan was governor of California, who many of you probably know became horrifically a president of the United States. He actually ate grapes on television in order to insult and to imply and to share with everybody how he felt about farm workers and how he felt about this boycott. But yet the boycott won. They won some contracts with growers who agreed to some basic rights for farm workers. Now, that's not to think that farm workers are being treated better in other ways, and we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the other things when we look back at our history and ways in which food has been a tool for social change is the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party created the free breakfast program. What they saw and what they realized was the government doesn't care about our people. The school system doesn't care about our people. We have to figure out ways in which we take care of ourselves and we empower ourselves. Because we know when children go to school hungry, what's on their mind isn't exactly concentrating or studying because they're hungry, because their stomach is growling. Now, anybody who's ever been hungry, you know that you're concentrating. Trying earlier today, I went through this, my stomach was growling, you know. I mean, you're thinking about that. You're thinking about how embarrassed you are. And what the Black Panther Party said is we don't need anybody to tell us what to do to take care of ourselves. And they created the free breakfast program. And again, the federal government came in and they, you know, are responsible for killing members of the Black Panther Party. They are responsible for infiltrating the Black Panther Party and trying to destroy the Black Panther Party. But they persisted. And what ended up happening, ironically, for those of you who don't know, is that that's why the government created the free breakfast program, which we know is in jeopardy right now. But that is why it was created in response to what the Black Panther Party was doing for communities. In the 1970s, there was a boycott against Coors for their homophobic hiring style and many other things they were doing within the company. And the LGBTQIA movement called for a boycott of Coors in the 1970s. And what happened is Coors changed their hiring practices. So again, another way that a call was put out for people and asking people to respect this and use it as a way to speak out about their values and the things that they believe in. Now, we know again, food is a tool for social change. It has always also been used in a negative light. We know that colonization devastated indigenous communities in the Americas to this day. We also know that colonization is still taking place, and food to this day is still being used as a weapon to oppress and harm other people. So it's really important that and if you even look at Bud Light, when the transphobic people took over and had that Bud Light campaign, we need to be aware of these things and we need to speak out. There's a whole long list of companies that we should be aware of and the problems with them that we shouldn't be supporting. Now, recently, the Prime Minister of Barbados gave a talk about asking for a global reset. And what she was hoping for and what she was asking for is some recognition of the power in which we hold. She wanted the world leaders to come together and take a pause, to recognize that people are going to bed hungry, that people are having trouble paying their rent, that we have the power, that the governments have the power to change how things are done. And to me, this is so important. And I use the image of the Salt Lake City mayor here. When the government in Utah decided to ban the pride flag, she figured out a way in which to put the pride flag in the city's flag. This is what we need to be seeing more of, people recognizing the power that they have in their own lives, in their own realms, and how they can make a difference. One of the things Food Empowerment Project did is we said we want who we are and how we function to be reflective of the type of world we want to see. So instead of having hierarchy, instead of having, somebody telling everybody what to do, we turned and became using a collective model as a way to say this is how things should be done. Every worker, every community member should have a voice in their neighborhood, in their job, to how they're being paid, to how their work is being done. And we wanted to make sure that that is the type of world that we help to create and to show that it is possible. Now, as mentioned before, and there's some stuff already said about veganism and animal rights, which is fantastic. But again, Food Empowerment Project is a vegan organization for the animals because this is my bunny Benito, who we found 4 years ago on Friday on the streets in downtown San Jose. And Benito has a right to his flesh without worrying about consuming him, his fur without somebody wearing him, his beautiful eyes without worrying about cosmetics being put in. And he has a right to his own being without anybody causing any harm. We also have, all the animals, cows who are raised for milk, who are, doesn't really matter how big or how small the farm is, these animals are being separated because the milk is being um, pumped, so to speak, for human consumption. A lot of environmental organizations bypass some of this discussion right now. They bypass the impacts that dairy is having on the environment. Environmental racism, where Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are more impacted by negative pollutants, is also included in the animal agriculture industries, whether it be pig farms in North Carolina, dairy farms in California. And those of us who are members of these environmental organizations, now is the time for us to say there's nobody to rely on but ourselves. Now is the time for you to institute vegan only meals at your events. Not asking for the rest of their lives, although that would be great, but at least for their events to take a stand, because right now, the best thing we can do for the environment and the best thing we can do for non-human animals is to simply stop consuming them. And I know that going vegan is difficult for some. I'm not going to act like it isn't. But for those of us who have that amount of privilege, and we know a lot of these environmental organizations and other organizations do, we need to really start pushing the envelope there because we have ourselves only. We don't need to wait for anybody else to ask for these changes to happen. Now, as was mentioned earlier, with Ember's talk about what's happening with immigrants, with ICE, I know that right now they're saying they're going to stop targeting farm workers, but I'm still getting text messages on my phone of farm workers in the Central Valley being detained and kidnapped off the streets by ICE. And so farm workers in this country already endure so many abuses. It's just only gotten more severe. We have farm workers who unfortunately can't even attend their children's graduations in fear of being deported, even though day in and day out they provide food and they put food on the tables for so many of us inside of the United States and outside of the United States. Again, one of the things we're asking for is for people to honor and listen to the calls of farm workers themselves. Listen to the coalition of Immokalee workers who are asking you, if you believe in the rights of farm workers, boycott Wendy's, boycott Publix. These are the things that you can do right now to help farm workers and stand up for the rights of farm workers. Tell these stores why you're not supporting them, why you're not going in there to support them anymore. We also have our school supply drive for the children of farm workers coming up, which we'd love for you all to support, where we're trying to gather school supplies for the children of farm workers in the Central Valley. These are the ones who pick your strawberries, your raspberries, your blackberries, all sorts of fruits and vegetables like lettuce. So again, when we look at food, food is one way in which governments try to wield so much control over us. And in my opinion, they don't we don't have to let it be that way. The fact that right now so many people are going to be dealing without basic safety mechanisms to keep their families fed is horrific. And this is something that the United States and the government uses repeatedly, not just this administration, but as something they dangle in front of quote liberals and the conservatives to try to say this is sustenance, this is what keeps people going. And instead of using it as a right, as it should be for every living being on this planet, they use it as a weapon of control. We have done work in this area looking specifically at communities faced with food apartheid, where these are areas where communities lack they have higher rates of dietary diseases. They lack access to healthy foods. And we found some consistencies in our work. One of which, of course, is that these communities have higher amounts of liquor stores and convenience stores. We find that these communities lack grocery stores. They lack, well, we'll talk about it in a minute, but they lack the ability to have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. Now, again, this is important not only because we know diets higher in fruits and vegetables are good for your health. And as a vegan organization, we don't want anybody consuming any animal products because it's not going to help them, it's not going to help the communities, and it's not going to help the environment. But also because of the mere fact that many Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are what we call lactose normal. A lot of people use the term lactose intolerant, and it implies there's something wrong with Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, as if there's something wrong with us because we can't digest the milk of another species. Or weirdly, they think it's okay to digest the milk of another species as an adult. We use this term very clearly, and this is why it's such a problem that many communities that are impacted don't have access to plant-based milks. Because again, this means kids are only getting a source of milk or dairy that will cause stomach aches, digestional problems that will impact their ability again to study in school. We are very strong that dairy is a legacy of colonization. Columbus brought the cows over on his second voyages. For those of us who are indigenous to the Americas, it is not something that our ancestors drank. It also impacts, a lot of other BIPOC communities for various reasons. But it's really important that this is yet another problem with our food system. And I want to remind everybody that the food system that we have in the United States was never meant to benefit brown, Black, or indigenous people. It was meant to benefit everybody else. It was meant to be, it survived off our back, our blood, our tears, and our lives. And that is why this system has never been made for us. It's been made to exploit us. And I'm running out of time. So I'm just going to mention really quickly, we have a campaign and a boycott against Safeway because what they've been doing is they have been preventing new grocery stores or from opening up in their previous land. So basically, a Safeway will be in a downtown area. They will close that location down and they'll put a restrictive deed on their former property saying no other grocery store can move in for 15 years, 30 years plus, depriving that community of having a grocery store. We've done focus groups. We don't believe in extraction. We give back to the community. We pay everybody for their time. And some of the things we found out in our focus groups, as Kennedy alluded to earlier, that not being able to afford the food is one of the main reasons why people lack access to healthy foods, because so many people who live in these communities are BIPOC, they are single mothers, and they're working several jobs to make ends meet, but the jobs are low wage. And so we need anybody who wants people to have access to healthy foods. If people want other people to go vegan, you need to be pushing for living wages because it's what's right. We also know that immigrants and other communities um, ate healthier in the countries they lived in than when they moved to the United States, because they only have access to things like tomato sauce, tomato paste, and not fresh tomatoes. So in terms of the solutions, for me, I live in an apartment. I don't know that I believe in owning land. I will probably always need to shop at a grocery store. So what we encourage are worker-owned cooperatives, because again, the power is with the workers and they make decisions. They don't need the government to tell them to give discounts for EBT on fresh fruits and vegetables. They do it on their own because they believe in the community and they want to help the community to thrive. We also believe very much so of people growing their own food. This is taking back our power. When we grow our own food, we do not need anybody's permission. If we're growing our own food, there's community gardens to support. They cannot use that as a weapon against us. We can be self-reliant and we don't have to worry about anybody's permission to be able to eat fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. We have a grow your own food. Uh, our advisory board member, Jazz, really enhanced this incredibly well. It's a beautiful resource and very thorough. I'm showing this here because I want to remind people we do have power. We've been asked to boycott Target because of their policies. I would say not only DEI, but to the LGBTQ community, that we have power. They have asked us to boycott Target. Now, somebody like me who liked Target, it has been a change. It's been a little bit of discomfort, but more than likely, if you're attending this webinar, you have some form of privilege. And when people are asking you to do things that you might be a little bit inconvenient, this is the time to rest with that inconvenience, to rest with that self and be like, okay with it, and understand this is about a bigger calling. This is about creating a bigger sense of change that we need to make in this country, and to stand in solidarity with those who are being most impacted by the decisions of this current administration. So again, this is about joining our voices with other voices to demand change. And now is the time that we do it. Now is the time that we look at any control and any power that we have in any aspect of our lives, and we figure out how we can make a change to stand for justice, compassion, and empathy, and against the current regime. Thank you.
Where do I even start? Lauren, that was incredible. Thank you so much for showing that the journey to liberation is not single threaded, and that there are so many things that we can do to tackle these injustices that are happening to us, to our families, and to our communities as a whole. We're now going to move into a Q&A, so you can put all of your questions for Lauren in the chat or the Q&A box below, and we're going to have about 10 minutes for those. So let's go ahead and put those in. One question for you is, do you have any advice for someone that wants to become self-reliant, maybe just be with a co-op or grow their own food, things like that?
I think if people want to grow their own food, I mean, I know that what Jazz created on our page about growing your own food, and it's veganic, is you can grow things in your windowsill. She said something beautiful like windowsills can be your best friend. So growing food that way. And again, I know to some extent this is a privilege, so I want to recognize that. And I think that those of us who have the privilege have more responsibilities right now. But I do think being members of your local co-op, even if it's not a worker-owned co-op, to being members of a cooperative versus supporting corporations that today really are just exploiting their workers, the land, and all of our people.
Thank you. And another question, is it hard to get a co-op started in your community?
There are a lot of resources out there for co-ops. I know we created a fact sheet at one point in time. I might have to dig that out, but there are a lot of resources to start cooperatives. Again, we really strongly encourage people to go forward on worker-owned cooperatives versus member-owned cooperatives.
Thank you. And then a question from Gavin. How do you get community gardens built?
A lot of community gardens right now are really geared towards more privileged people than the more vulnerable communities. I would think that you can see if the city has anything like that. I know a lot of churches have things like that as well, but a lot of cities have them. Probably some environmental community groups would know as well.
That's really good to know. And Gavin, if you maybe check out your local ordinances or just from your local city government, they might have some ways to help you. And then another question. So there's a lot of coalitions that are being started with groups or organizations coming together to create federal change. And so that's one way that people are trying to create change at the federal level. But do you have advice for any other folks that are trying to get some systemic change within in the food system?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to find our natural allies, but we also need to be true to ourselves and what it is that we're doing. I'm very against vegans going into joining with other organizations just to try to promote veganism. I think that only get involved with other groups if you sincerely believe in that cause, because otherwise it's going to be really transparent and probably going to make vegans seem like people think we are. We're always just pushing our own agenda. But really getting involved in other organizations, and then you figure out ways to intertwine the issues that you care about, but to go in figuring out what it is that you can do to help and how you can support.
Very helpful. And also, just like a personal question, I feel like there's so much information within the food system, so many changes about history, and then just so many amazing groups that have existed to really just try to change the paradigm of what it means to have food justice. And so, do you have any advice for people that are trying to learn about the different histories or the really noble figures and ways that we can retain that information to use it when it's needed?
It's a great question. Um, I think it's always important. I mean, one of the things I love the most to do is learn about other social justice movements, especially the old ones, because I use them for tips for campaign strategy now. The suffragist movement in England, the suffragist movement in the US, obviously the civil rights movement, the Black Panther Party, SNCC, CORE. There's just so many incredible, reading about, Medgar Evers. There's so many really cool people to learn from, I think. And so I really tried to read about all of that and just to learn and figure out how I can apply it to whatever it is I'm working on. Fred Hampton, we'll throw Fred Hampton, Steve Biko out there.
Yes. There's so many. And if you all have not heard, I haven't heard of a few of those. So I'll definitely do some research later. But I'm sure those are all very powerful people, especially the last two that Laura named. So let's, get active in learning. Huey P. Newton, that's another very
Yes, Huey.
important one.
I have
Uh,
all of his books
yeah,
in front of me, signed so
yeah,
by David Hilliard. So yeah, that's awesome.
that is super cool. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for answering those questions and for the questions in the chat. Super excited to get active with food justice.
Thanks, Kennedy. Thanks, everybody.
So, our world as we know it is changing rapidly. For many of us, what was our normal 6 months ago has completely shifted to one that might be unstable, frustrating, and simply put, mentally exhausting. These changes can bring about profound mental health changes, leading us to feel hopeless and helpless. But despite these often shared emotions, it's a way for us to cope and make a positive impact through our pain. For our next speaker, I have the pleasure of introducing Naomi Mosher. But before we get started with Naomi's presentation, we have one more poll to do so that you can see your knowledge on mental health issues. All right, for your question, what percentage of youth ages 12 to 17 receive mental health care? So we're going to take about 10 to 15 seconds to think about this. Maybe it can be a little bit helpful to think about the topics we have had today have not been very equitable. We have a lot of change to make in our system. So maybe that can help you with this question. All right, let's go ahead and bring up those results on screen. Okay, so we had 20% say, or 60% say that 20% of youth receive mental health care. And then we had 40% of people say that 40% of youth receive mental health care. And the answer is 20%. There is a really big disparity between the youth that are able to receive mental health care. And Naomi's going to share a lot more about that. So thank you all for doing that poll. Naomi Mosher, she, her, is a passionate public health advocate and researcher committed to advancing health equity, particularly for Black women and other marginalized communities. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Howard University and a master's in public health from George Washington University. She is set to begin her Doctor of Public Health at Morgan State University in fall 2025. And she is doing all of this and is still so young and is just seizing all of her opportunities. It's so amazing. At her previous community and population health fellowship, Naomi focused on sociocultural research and initiatives centered on maternal mortality and morbidity, working to address the systemic disparities faced by Black birthing people. Her work examines the intersection of race, gender, and health, and she brings deep expertise in community engagement, language equity, and qualitative research. She is also a certified mental health first aid trainer, equipping communities with tools to support emotional well-being and identify a mental health crisis. Wow, Naomi, it's so nice to have you. And as you all listen, please think about ways that you can incorporate mental health and wellness into your daily life. So great to have you.
Thank you for having me. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Oh, it says my screen share is paused.
Maybe we can try exit out and then try it again, maybe.
It still says paused.
Try double clicking the enter full screen mode. If not, then I can pull up your presentation on my end.
It's on full screen.
Perfect. Oh, there it is. It is on screen, Naomi. We should be able to see it. Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. My name is Naomi Mosher, and I'll be presenting on uplifting youth mental health. I'm a doctoral student and an instructor at Morgan State University. Early this year, I completed my MPH at George Washington University, and I hold a Bachelor of Arts from Howard. My work focuses on health equity, community and population health, and policy. And as Kennedy mentioned, I'm also a certified mental health first aid trainer. I want to begin this by saying this is more than just a talk. It's a conversation, a space to reflect, and a moment to center your feelings and experiences. Mental health is not just diagnosis or therapy, it's about how we live, connect, and survive in a world that doesn't always feel safe or fair. Especially in times of political change, fear, injustice, our mental health becomes even more important. So, for the next few minutes, we'll talk about what mental health really means, what young people are going through right now, and how we can support each other. Whether you're struggled yourself or know someone who has, this space is for you. You're not alone in any of this. Okay, let's take a moment to breathe. No matter what you believe, where you're from, or what you're going through, breath is the one thing we all have in common. And it can be one of our strongest tools for emotional balance. Breathing deeply can shift our bodies from stress mode to calm. When we're anxious, our bodies think we're in danger, but breathing slowly tells our brain you're safe. It slows our heart rate, eases muscle tension, and helps bring clarity. It literally helps your body move from fight or flight into a calmer, more focused state. Let's practice this together. Sit up straight, relax your shoulders if you can. Inhale deeply through your nose for a count of 4. Hold that breath for 4, then slowly exhale through your mouth for 6. Okay, let's try together. Okay, breathe in deeply through your nose for 4. Hold that for 6. And then exhale through your mouth. This kind of breath work isn't just for yoga classes or when you're already feeling overwhelmed. You can do it before a test, in between bathroom breaks between classes, or in just lying in bed. It's free, private, and it's powerful. When we learn to breathe through hard stuff, we remind ourselves that we deserve peace, and even more, we can pass along peace to somebody else. Mental health is how you feel, think, and handle life. It's emotional, it's psychological, it's social. It affects how we relate to others, how we handle stress, how we see ourselves. But here's what mental health is not. It's not just about mental illness. It's not something only adults deal with. And it's definitely not something that you should be ashamed of. Your mental health deserves care the same way your physical health does. If you had a broken arm, you go to the doctor. If you're struggling emotionally, it's okay to seek help too. The problem is there's a lot of stigma, silence, shame, or judgment around mental health, especially in Black, Brown, LGBTQ, and immigrant communities. Some of us are told just to pray about it or to stay strong. And while strength and prayer is beautiful, vulnerability is strength too. When we talk about mental health, we give each other permission to be real. When we ask for help, we give someone else the courage to do the same. And when we care for our minds, we create a world that is kinder, softer, and more honest. Let's talk about what young people are feeling today. According to the CDC, nearly 40% of teens reported feeling persistently sad or hopeless. 20% say they've seriously considered death by suicide. That's 1 in 5 of your peers. And 1 in 5 have been diagnosed with a mental, emotional, or behavioral health condition. These aren't just numbers, they represent real lives. Your classmates, your teammates, maybe even you. Why is this happening? There are many reasons. Social media pressure, family dynamics, school stress, violence, climate anxiety, political climate, discrimination, lack of access to help. But here's the truth. If you're struggling, it's not because you're weak. It's because you're living through really hard things, and it's okay to say, I'm not okay. This is why community matters. We can be the ones who notice when something feels off with a friend. We can normalize checking in with each other, saying, I see you and I got you. Because even if the world feels heavy, we don't have to carry it alone. Mental health doesn't impact all young people equally. Some communities face extra challenges, and it's important that we talk about that honestly. For example, over 70% of LGBTQ youth report feeling anxious, and many don't feel safe seeking help at school or at home. Black youth have experienced a 144% increase in suicide attempts over the last decade. Native youth face one of the highest suicide rates in the country. And 40% of Hispanic youth report feeling sad or hopeless nearly every day. These numbers aren't just statistics, they're stories, lives, and struggles that often go unseen. And it's not because something is wrong with these communities, it's because society often fails to support them. Discrimination, poverty, lack of representation, unsafe environments are being told to stay silent. All of these increase stress and trauma. These are things we can't always control. What we can do is recognize these truths, stand in solidarity, and make sure no one feels invisible. If you're a part of one of these communities, your feelings are valid. And if you're an ally, your role is a powerful tool. We need each other. Let's talk about community. When systems like healthcare, schools, and law enforcement fail to protect us, community becomes essential. Immigrant families often fear going to hospitals because of deportation risk. Some youth don't feel safe in churches or schools anymore. And when leaders ignore what's happening, it sends the message that our lives don't matter. But here's where community steps in. When institutions fall short, we show up. We seek one another, we speak up, share resources, create safer spaces, even if those are just small groups of friends or trusted adults. You can build community by listening to others without judgment, creating group chats where people can vent safely, organizing events focused on wellness, or simply checking in regularly. We heal in connection. No one is meant to do this alone. And if you don't feel like you're qualified, just being there for someone makes a world of a difference. It's also important to know your rights. If you or someone you know is targeted by ICE or stopped by police, remember that you do have the right to remain silent and you do not have to answer questions about your immigration status or where you're born. You have the right to ask for a lawyer and refuse to sign any documents without one. If ICE comes to your door, you do not have to open it unless you already signed a warrant from a judge, or unless they have a warrant signed from a judge. Knowing your rights protects yourself and your community, and it also reduces the fear in moments of crisis. Organizations like United We Dream and the ACLU provide Know Your Rights cards and trainings for young people and families. Let's zoom out and talk about what kind of support is available and where. A map of the US shows that some states receive funding and prioritize youth mental health. Others have little to no support system in place. This means that the care you get can depend on where you live. For example, in California, there's funds for school-based mental health programs, providing free counseling for youth regardless of immigration status, and protects LGBTQ plus health access. But states like Texas or Florida have cut protections, banned gender-affirming care, and removed mental health supports from schools. This is unfair, and your zip code shouldn't decide your well-being. But knowing the reality helps us to know where to fight it. Start asking questions of your community. Does my school counselor receive training in trauma or LGBTQ plus issues? Is there a local hotline, a youth center, an after-school group? If there isn't, could you and your peers build one? We might not be able to change a state overnight, but we can build systems of care within our own circles, and that's real power. Laws and policies coming from the federal government can deeply affect our mental health, especially if they target our rights or identities. Let's look at a few key issues. DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Thousands of undocumented young people live in constant fear of losing their protections from deportation. This chronic fear takes a toll on mental health. Gender affirming care. Some states are trying to ban gender affirming care for trans youth who only make up about 4% of the youth population across the US, even when it's recommended by doctors. This sends a message that trans lives don't matter. Book bans and curriculum censorship. In some states, books about racism, LGBTQ plus identity, or mental health are being banned. This erases stories and silences conversations. Reproductive rights. Since the overturn of Roe v. Wade, many youth with uteruses have lost access to reproductive care. That confusion, fear, and lack of control will inevitably impact mental health. When people in power take away our rights, it causes real emotional harm. But the good news is, young people across the country are fighting back, organizing, protesting, and advocating for their communities. You could be one of them. Your voice matters, and your mental health is political. So, what can you do? Way more than you think. Start by advocating for yourself. If you're feeling off, speak up. Speak up. Talk to someone, a teacher, a friend, a counselor. Practice saying things like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need a break. That's not weakness, that's strength. Next, advocate for your peers. If you notice a friend withdrawing, check in. Say, you've been quiet lately, want to talk? Or, I care about you, what can I do? Sometimes people just need to know they're not invisible. Then get involved. Join a club, start a mental health club at your school. Attend a protest, volunteer with a youth-led group, post on social media to spread truth and resources. You can create zines, podcasts, or videos to make others feel less alone. When you support someone else's healing, you help your own too. We're the strongest when we lift each other up. You're also not alone, and you don't have to figure out everything by yourself. There are organizations built just for you, like the Trevor Project, which offers 24/7 support for LGBTQ youth. You can call, text, or chat online. The Sad Girls Club, mental health community for girls, femmes, and non-binary people of color. 988, the National Crisis Line. Just dial 9 or text 988 for mental health support. The Jed Foundation, They provide tools and programs to help high school and college students with emotional health. The National Runway Safe Line. If your home isn't safe or you're in crisis, this is a place to turn. You can bookmark these, save them in your notes, share them with your friends. You never know who may need them. Thank you all again for listening. Thank you for being here and thank you for showing up for yourself and your community. This presentation wasn't just about statistics or problems, it was about people. You, me, us. You are allowed to feel, you're allowed to ask for help, you're allowed to be messy, complicated, and you're allowed to grow. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you real. Keep being your friend who checks in, keep using your voice, keep breathing through hard moments. You're a part of something powerful. And if anything today made you feel seen or supported, I hope you'll stay in touch. Um, you matter, your story matters, and we're building this better world together.
Thank you so much, Naomi. This was so beautiful, and you left us with so many pockets of peace. And I feel so encouraged, and just know a lot of the youth and other people on the call definitely felt that way too. So thank you so much. We're now going to move into a Q&A for Naomi. So please share any questions that you have on mental health in the chat box down below, or just any questions that came up throughout the presentation that Naomi shared. So, for one of your questions, you have quite a few degrees. And what made you decide to get a master's in public health?
I was always an advocate and I love social justice. So, initially I went to college to become a doctor. And as I was talking to a staffer during an internship on the Hill, she was telling me that I'm more in line with public health and wanting to make systemic change rather than in a doctor's office. So I took my first public health class and I immediately fell in love and knew I wanted to have a career change and dedicate my life to making life better for other people.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that hopefully others will inspire to go down the other rights of the mental health field and medical field, because there are many. So, do you have anything that you do when you feel helpless?
I journal. I bring my journal with me almost everywhere. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm writing down my thoughts. I have a thought that's like negative. I'm writing it down because I feel like if you explore your feelings, you'll become more in tune with yourself. So when you have those little negative thoughts, you're like, oh, you can name these emotions that you're feeling rather than just feeling overwhelmed. And, oh, I'm anxious about this. This happened. That's why I feel this way. I felt this way before. Now to handle this. So I love journaling. It's a great way to decompress.
That's a really good one. Journaling is something that I feel like a lot more youth are using now. And it's a really good way just to get your thoughts out there. And you can also like type on your phone if like you don't have a notepad nearby. So love that one. And then another question is mental health access a privilege?
Absolutely. It's a privilege to people who have healthcare and people who can safely access said care. I remember when I was 16, I went to my first therapy appointment and I just like filled out something online, went on my own. And my mom was like, I got it on my insurance. And of course, she was okay with it. But if my mother wasn't okay with it, that I would have repercussions for trying to seek mental health care. And also thinking about how hard it is to get mental health care, especially in some states where it's not viewed as like, a need, it's viewed as privilege. So, of yes, mental health care is that of privilege.
That's a great answer. And that actually kind of segues into one of our other questions from one of the youth in the chat. But they're basically saying that they have a friend who struggles with mental health, who finds that they're not accepted in their state. And if they find that it's better for their friend to move to a state that might be more accepting, or should they have their friend wait until the legislative changes get more progressive? So I'm sure maybe some of us might have dealt with this in our own lives, with being in a state where we don't feel accepted, and might find that it is better to move. So do you have any advice to that?
Yes. I think that I hope that the political landscape gets more accepting and there's things that happen to make all of our lives much easier. But I think that if we're looking at mental health care and we're thinking that in 3 years it'll get better, 3 years is a long time to undergo all of these things. So if you have an opportunity to liberate yourself, I would for sure take that opportunity, but it's also not an opportunity that everyone has. So I think seeking out resources within your area will be a great benefit for you. I think that not all the time these things are available, so you can create them. You are able to do these things and liberate your community as a whole as well.
That is so important to keep in mind. Thank you, Naomi. 3 years is a long time, and sometimes it's so easy just to say, well, the time will go by. But if you're someone that is vulnerable, that is being attacked, it can be really hard to endure that. And then one other question, and if you have any other questions, please put those in the chat. But do you have any advice for students that might want to be starting their own mental health programs in their schools, colleges, high schools, middle schools, anything like that, to get students feeling mentally encouraged?
Yes. First check what resources are already there, because there's no need to reinvent the wheel, but you can improve it. So if you see someone else in another state or another area who has something that's similar to what you want to do, reach out to them. People are so friendly. You just have to take that first step and like really talk to them. And most of the time they're willing to help you, especially if they're so dedicated to the same cause that you are. Mentorship is really important. I love mentors. I love sponsorship because they're speaking your names in rooms before you can even get there. And I think that anything is possible as long as you have a plan, write it down, and no action is better than some action is better than no action. So just start working. Like it'll all work out. Like even if you don't know what you're doing quite yet, just keep working at it.
Thank you so much, Naomi. That was our last question. I feel so much more mental clarity after that, and I want to keep that going. So I'll keep doing those breathing practices that you shared with us in the beginning. So thank you so much for that. And it was lovely having you.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Well, thank you so much to everyone that joined our youth seminar, Empowering Our Communities, and to our phenomenal experts. We are at the close, but this was definitely an event that I will never forget. I'm also so delighted to bring out the full FEP team to give a wave. They have been so tremendous in the effort that was put into this event. So let's bring everyone out. And we can start with Maddie.
Hi everyone, I'm Maddie, she, her. I'm FEP's Vegan Programs team member. Thank you all so much for attending tonight and also to the amazing speakers. We're so appreciative of the time that you took. It's great to have everyone here.
Hi everyone, my name is Tyra. I am FEP's communications team member. It was such a delight to hear from all the speakers. Thank you to everybody who attended, and yeah, just thank you all. I will pass it on to the next person.
Hi, my name is Jordan. Currently they, he, and I am Food Empowerment Project's web and database team member. I'm so excited that everyone showed up today and learned all these valuable things.
Again, I'm Lauren Ornelas, founder and general programs team member of FEP. Quick mention that Lee, our colleague, is dealing with storms in Tennessee, which I know somebody else, Gavin maybe, is also in Tennessee, but dealing with storms there. And his electricity went out, but thanks to Lee for all of his work. I just want to thank Kennedy so much for not only being a phenomenal MC, as she always is, but for all of her work to put this together and her idea and making it happen. So just a huge thank you for Kennedy. Thank you all for all the speakers, and a huge thank you to all of our supporters for making our work happen. Thank you so much for your belief in our work and helping push our work forward. And to all the youth, we really hope to work with you more closely. So please stay connected with us. And thank you again, Kennedy.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That is so sweet to bring up the entire team. This was super fun doing this with you all. And as Lauren said, I want this to be a resource for all youth on here and all supporters so that you can continue to look at ways that we can tackle these unjust systems. So whenever you have a question about the law, mental health, the food system, or your rights, please check out this video and share it with others. So youth hold so much power in the world, and everyone here has created a prioritization to create a better existence and to discourage the systems that are trying to take away our growth and existence. And continue, please, to speak out, stay active, and keep connected with FEP for future youth and community events. All of our power lies in the belief that we are not free until we are all joined hand in hand in collective liberation. So please continue to support one another and don't be afraid to reach out to FEP with any support. As we close, please remember to check your email for our post-event survey. You will receive a video recording, so you can always go back and check that out. And then also the survey, hope you didn't forget, everyone who is a youth will be receiving a youth activist packet, which will be super cool for you to use. And please fill out the survey for that by June 19th, so Juneteenth. Have an amazing rest of your day, and that's also linked in the chat as well. Bye, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. See you guys.